Heart and Hand is proud to be sponsored by the Rangers Youth Development Company, and lifelong fan John Daly was presented with a big blue jackpot prize of £16,414 by head coach Danny Rowe recently, and you could be a winner just like him. If you sign up to RYDC's Rangers Lotto, you could win at least £12,000 in the next end of month draw. Over 18s can play, and the more fans who take part, the bigger the prize will be. Visit rydc.co.uk now for full details of all their products, or click the link in the show description to sign up for Rangers Lotto. You'll be supporting the club and you could win a few bob as well. Hello everyone and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is David Edgar and as always I am your host, and I'm joined for a happier podcast this week after a weekend that did go our way by David Graham. Hello Davey.
Davey, listeners, good afternoon and happy Monday one and all.
Now, a couple of weeks ago people might have been forgiven tuning into this podcast for thinking that we'd given up. We hadn't, but what I did say was I was confident that Rangers would get back into the title race, so well done me on that. But also I was confident then we'd find a way to blow it, which was clearly me in a bad mood. And I could still be right about that, although I hope not to be. But that's the reality of a title race, isn't it, David? Some weeks the ball falls for you, other weeks it won't. And I suppose that this is the problem when you do a show every week, that sometimes you're going to be right, sometimes you're going to be wrong, but we're in a pretty good place, aren't we?
Well, look, I think what I'll say is, had we been told this, certainly even at the start of the season, never mind in the deepest, darkest moments of Russell Martin's reign, had we been told this, probably still even around Christmas, New Year, you'd absolutely bitten your hand off for this position. What I will say is that this weekend, it could have gone better. Hearts could have lost as well. But in terms of the wider fixtures, if you want to put it that way, we have obviously benefited. Now, what I will say is, I think within the next 7 games or 7 rounds of games, there may well be weekends that we are on the other side of this.
There will be
ebbs and flows. It will be a roller coaster. But what I certainly will say is that going into the international break, and I've mentioned this before, having been inside the tent, it's very much, it can be a very long break. But in this case, I think it will feel much shorter. And certainly the other side of the city, the breaks probably came at the wrong time for them. So that stench will linger for essentially a fortnight. And I hope they can smell it right now.
Yeah, you never want to go into an international break off the back of a bad result. You just really don't. It is like the worst, and it's happened to us. And you just sit and stew on it really for a fortnight. It's very difficult not to. There's nothing to shift attention off of it. So it was vitally important that we did get the victory, regardless of what happened with the other side. Look, I think I'm quite happy to do the mea culpa. I'm a football fan. I get up and down based on results. I don't pick a position and just stick to it. And I think the thing with Rangers is, because the last 15 years have been such that we have a tendency, I certainly do, to maybe not always judge on what I'm watching, but to judge on what has happened previously. And I think it will probably take a period of sustained success before that changes, if I'm honest. But yeah, I mean, look, the reality is it's difficult to keep calm during the title race. It's knife edge. It's great. It's what you live for. It's what you want. We say that. I'd love to be like 20 points ahead right now, but you want to be involved in it. You don't want to be in the situation we've been in far too often, which is essentially friendlies at this stage of the season. So it is far better to be involved in it. But Saturday evening we welcomed Aberdeen to Ibrox, and I'm going to say something right off the bat, Davey, and it might be controversial, but the only people that will annoy will be sheep, and I don't care. I can't remember an easier season against Aberdeen, really. I mean, maybe even in the 90s, I was going to say maybe the 90s, but they would show up against us. This year has been the most serene, 2-0, 2-0, 4-1, And never really in any doubt in any of those games did I think we're not winning this football match.
No, we were totally dominant to the point actually Saturday where I had a little whinge that it would be nice if we had a forward that could score a goal. Thus was sort of the fact that we had been so comfortable. Like I think they are really poor, which is hilarious. But you're right. Even times where they have been poor, they've always found a way of getting up for it. Pataudry is a tough place to go, and they always seem to lift their game at Ibrox as well. But look, I was essentially touting him when Danny Role got the job, Stephen Robinson, for our job, maybe because he's from Northern Ireland.
Oh, you
He's a hell
think?
of, yeah, yeah, maybe. But he's a hell of a job in his hands there because they, from what I can see, have put. They've probably got quite, costly squad, both
They
in
have a
terms of
very
fees they're
costly squad for
paid,
a non-old firm
and
Scottish
yeah,
football team. Very
and
costly.
the wages, and they, for all of his faults, McInnes there clearly did a very good job with them over the years when you compare them to what they're sitting at now.
Yeah, Rangers went into this game, I think, Hearts had won, obviously, and I think we all felt Celtic would get the result the next day. So there was a bit of pressure in Rangers, and I thought we handled it really, really well. Again, like the opponents was poor, but you can only beat what's in front of you and beat them well, and Rangers did that. And bar one, second half moment where I think we got a bit cocky, and handed them a goal. Then I think it was a pretty dominant performance, as you say. Going to have to do something, repeat, if you like, something we've been saying for a few weeks, but it bears repeating. In two Romans, we have a very, very good player there. And of course, he's involved in that first goal because he gives us something that we haven't really had from fullbacks in a while, which is he gets to the byline. Intelligent runs, found with a great ball by Nico Raskan. But I love this, David, about him. He doesn't just then get there and hammer the ball across goal and say, well, I put it in a good area. My argument against that is it's not a good area if nobody's there. So look up and see if anybody's there and then try and work something out. Otherwise, he picks out Mikey Moore, shots blocked, and then a lovely finish by another impressive January signing, Tochi Chukwani. If there's one criticism of both, and it's not a criticism of them, it's they both tire, run about 60, 70 minutes. That's easy sorted. That just needs a good pre-season with us, right? They've come from, with all due respect, maybe leagues that are not considered to us, certainly clubs that are not considered to us. That gets sorted easily enough, but they look right solid signings.
Oh yeah, yeah. Listen, very much so. And I've always said, in January, I said that I can't remember the number, whether it was 4 to 6. I said that we needed probably at least four starters, um, if we were going to have any chance of winning the league. Now, if I'm honest with you, um, obviously Romans and I think Chukwuani are definitely two of them. Nadiri, there's probably then an argument that that's your third, and I think the jury's still to an extent out on Scov Olsen, but that potentially would be your fourth. But if we are to win the league, it will be one of the contributing factors will be how important January was in terms of the window, and ultimately that's the same across any major league when you're in such a tight title race. And the one thing I'll say regarding their fitness, and I noticed it especially in the old firms, I think probably you're right. It's not even in terms of, and listen, neither you or I are world class athletes, Stevie, but in reality, whatever league you're playing in, even if the game may be technically at times, a higher level than what happens in Scotland, the intensity of playing for Rangers, playing at
Yeah.
Ibrox in front of a crowd with such expectation, and the weight essentially of the jersey is unquestioned. Like I remember talking to Stuart Dallas when he said about being in the Premiership, and he said, the one thing he remembers about the Premier League was just how intense it was in terms of, yes, the match and going away to the Etihad, etc., but also the lead up to it with the amount of media scrutiny. Like every week was the same, and he almost sort of described being the Premiership as akin to, that kind of like week before playoffs in the Championship.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose coming from clubs and leagues that Romans, Chikawani, and others, especially Nadiri, who's come from essentially the equivalent of League One in Germany, there will be a big change in the intensity and the pressure, and that'll ultimately affect them physically and mentally.
I think with Nadiri, and there has been some criticism because he hasn't been scoring a lot of goals, and to be honest, he hasn't been getting a lot of chances. As strange as it might sound, I don't necessarily think that's his main role in the team. He does a shitload of pressing and work. And I bet you if you spoke to his teammates, they would all rave about the job he does. It's an unglamorous job. Now, obviously, at Rangers, if you're playing up front, you'll need to score more goals. And I think he will. I think it will come, as you say, with experience. But he is contributing. Watch the game back, watch the work rate that he puts in, watch the amount of pressing that he does. He is very important in us in gaining that bit of control that we didn't have earlier in the season. And I think that, for me, in terms of the goal scoring, I do think it will come because, he's showing in his career that he can finish. It's maybe about just getting the balance right at the moment. But right now he's been asked to do a job for the team and he's wholeheartedly doing it. And I can understand that at the moment he's saying, look, the manager's told me to do this. I am going to do this. And I think it does help in terms of, if you look at one constant in the last few games, no matter how we play, is that we are pretty much in control of the matches, which was not the case earlier in the season. And a large part of that, I think, is due to the fact that it's very difficult to get out against us unless, as we did in the second half, we give you the ball in a great area. And he's a big part of that. He leads that from the front.
Oh yeah, look, there's no doubt about it, and I think there are times where, and Rangers are not the only team that. I think it's very hard when you're a striker that doesn't score goals. So I think especially when you've been brought up on a diet of, an Ali McCoy, and the record number of goals he scored, we expect our strikers to just bang in, 20 to 25 goals a season because that's what they should be doing. And that's a fair expectation. I don't think it's asking for anything crazy. But I also think that the way, I suppose, modern football is played, the way the game is played, like if you see on Saturday we had 4 different goal scorers, and I know I did have that whinge to say, oh well, it would be nice if we had a striker to score a goal, but
yes, you did.
And I admit that I'm big enough to admit my mistakes.
Don't worry, so, there's an admission from me coming in the second half, so don't worry about that. I'll match you on that.
Yeah. So what I would certainly say is that we probably do, if I'm honest, in the next 7 games, need someone, and I don't give a damn who that is, but we need someone to step up and probably score that kind of half a dozen goals because some of them will be crucial. Someone that we can sort of look at, and I think that even there with like Majowski and coming on and one thing and another, we probably still do need a bit of impact off the bench because if I'm honest, and again, look, this isn't me being negative after a 4-1 win, but I still feel we have a strong enough starting 11 to compete and win the league. But the jury's out, and an awful lot of those subs still, in my view. And I think probably that is where we maybe are another window, if not 2 away from, I think having the opportunity by this time next year to pull away, and maybe that's me being a bit too blue tinted with my glasses. But look, there's a real foundation coming there. I just think that there's probably just a few more pieces of the puzzle to be found.
No, I totally agree. I think that the foundations are in place for Rangers, regardless of how the rest of the season goes. I think the foundations are in place for next season again to hopefully have another good window because recruitment, you get that wrong, nothing else can follow. But you get it right, and you can build on what's already there. Mikey Moore gets the second goal, Davey, and I thought he was brilliant. And clearly I wasn't the only one. He was sponsors man of the match. He got a standing ovation as he came off. We've raved about the boy before, and we're going to continue to. It's the way he plays football. There's a bravery to the way he plays football, and by that what I mean is bravery to me is not always going and kicking someone. Bravery to me is getting kicked and getting the groans when you give the ball away, but still wanting the ball and still saying, okay, I'm still going to run at him. I know he's going to kick me again, but I'm doing it. And I'm still going to try and take him on, even though it might not come off and the crowd will groan, give me the ball after it. He's got that. And there's a sort of effervescence about him that I think fans respond to, particularly in an era of systems football. We watch a lot of it, a lot of systems based football, and watching somebody who's got that spark, that individual. He still does his shift for the team, by the way. The left hand side is very difficult to penetrate down for Rangers because him and Romans put a shift in. But when he gets the ball, he always looks to make something happen. And there are still areas of his game that will improve. Of course, there are. He's only 18. I think shot selection, he could have had a hat trick on Saturday. But in terms of just that natural ability to engage a football fan, I think he's got it, and he's lovely and refreshing to watch in this modern era.
Yeah, look, this is a bold claim, but I have no doubt Mikey Moore will be playing the Premiership next season. Because, well, the only caveat that says actually Spurs being relegated almost guarantees him to go back to Spurs, because I think they would probably use him as someone to try to get them back up. But
See, to be honest, I already think he's too good to play in a championship. Because it's Spurs, he might want to, but
listen, I don't disagree at all. In fact, I'm going to make a bold prediction that after the World Cup, we'll go back in the Nations League, and I know there's sort of controversy around the likes of Trent being left out, one thing or another, but for me, Mikey Moore could be and should be in and around the England squad after the World Cup, because if he's playing the Premiership regularly, he is a wonderful, naturally gifted footballer who, and everything I hear about him off the pitch as a professional, is really, really important. Is a really important part, obviously, his game. And I remember, not to sound like Adam and the scouting podcast, but I mean, there's four pillars I think that scouts talk about in terms of the physical, technical, tactical, and psychological elements of a player's game. And for me, he's in a green and a highly score in all four of those. And I think that I would have no doubt that he will be playing regularly in a top four Premiership side for the vast majority of his career.
I think so too.
And I think you're right. He almost is like a much better, he's with respect, he's probably a better player than now than maybe Ryan Kent ever was at his peak. But I think Ryan Kent is probably the last player that I recall that kind of get like bums off seats that people like, now the frustrating thing with Ryan Kent, and the same with Mikey Moore and many other players like them, they will lose the ball, but they'll come back and they'll try to do it again, and they'll lose it 7 times, but the eighth time they'll not
He'll get
make
through.
someone do a step over, a breakthrough and score. And that's why, you love them and you're frustrated at times with players like that. So no, I can't speak highly enough of him. Like, I hate to let, break anybody's heart, but like, if we were to extend his loan, I would be beyond shocked, absolutely beyond shocked, in a very pleasant way. But I just can't see us having him next year, unfortunately.
I don't think it's definite, but a large part of that is Spurs. We don't know, who the manager's going to be, what division they're going to be in. So that uncertainty. What I do know is if he is to come back, it won't be at the start of the summer. It'll be one that goes on for a bit. But would definitely love to have him. I mean, who wouldn't? He's just a quality footballer. And Rangers 2-0 up, and I actually thought for the first time in weeks, well, a wee bit of serenity, that's great. It felt like the killer goal. And then Rangers went through a period of about 45 seconds where they just got a bit cocky. There was a bit of complacency. They started trying things in and around their own box. It ends up with Chupwani giving the ball away and Aberdeen scoring. Now, he wasn't the only one at fault here. There were 2 or 3 risky passes played in the build-up to this moment. And I mentioned earlier that I also was guilty of a bit of a strop Saturday. Poor Adam that you mentioned there, our podder, was sat next to me and had to weather what can only be called an aggressive strop, Davy, at that point, because I was raging because we'd done it to ourselves. And the nerves in the stadium, which had absolutely been kept at bay. Really, the fans had been brilliant, but
very much so, yeah.
Yep, and we'd got the second, and we just looked set to cruise and see it out. And it was poor game management. What I will say is the players responded immediately. It was almost like they went, right, you know what, that's on us. Okay, we did this. Come on, we're better than them. And it wasn't long till we go up and get the third, and it really was cooked then.
Yeah, look, I think that there are times where when they did score, given the time of the game. Uh, and this is a compliment, even though it doesn't necessarily sound it. uh, we'd have drawn that game even a matter of months ago under Danny Role, because I think we probably didn't have the quality nor the mental fortitude to actually. We'd ended up trying to hold on for what was essentially the vast majority of the second half, and I think that's a challenge moving forward. In terms of uh, eradicating those mistakes, because Ibrox can become a very, very I don't want to say toxic, but it can become very edgy very quickly, even in a situation like that. So, no, it was good to see the fans staying with the team and the team staying with the fans. And ultimately, yeah, that was really the only blot in our copybook on Saturday, wasn't it?
No, it really was. And then we get a third lovely finish from Nico Raskin, who I thought had one of his better games at the weekend. And after that, it was a question of, how many will we add to it? Now, we should have added a goal, Bojan Miovski scoring it. And immediately the VAR check goes up. And I thought to myself, they are going to rule this out, right? I had seen the handball. I'd seen it hit Connor Barron on the arm, right? The referee had his back turned to it, and he couldn't see it, so he couldn't give it, right? So no complaints there from me. But there's then another 25 seconds before the ball goes in the net. Connor Barron is not involved in any of it. And Aberdeen get the ball back during this period. It is clearly not the same phase of play. It's clearly not a material handball on the incident. As soon as Aberdeen get the ball back, that's it. Different phase of play. Rangers then rob them of the ball and score. You cannot get that wrong. Amateurs wouldn't get that wrong. Football fans wouldn't get that wrong just from watching other games. The rule is crystal clear. You rule it a goal if the scorer handles the ball. We've all seen games down south where they're like, well, the ironic thing is if he'd handled it and then passed it, that wouldn't count. But because he handled it, it does. You cannot get this wrong. It's not possible. And common sense dictates that you go, hang on, lads, it's 25 seconds here. Far too long. Aberdeen have touched the ball, right? Good goal, game on. Rangers have had 20 goals ruled out this year, 20, right, by VAR. That's statistically anomalous, okay? Because it's not like we've scored 100, right? And you go, right, fair enough. It's quite clear that Scottish officials go through Rangers goals with a fine-tooth comb looking for reasons to disallow goals. And that one that they found at the weekend was laughable. There's no way you can give that because of the things I've described, the length of time between it happening and the ball going in the net, and the fact that Aberdeen have the ball in their possession, which completely changes it to a new phase of play. It's a fucking nonsense.
Yeah, it just look the problem with it is I look. Let's. I know we almost have a kind of weekly rant about officials, and even the fact that we can do it. Having won the game so comfortably probably highlights the just deep mistrust that we have in the SFA and the football establishment. And don't worry, listeners, we'll also have a pop at the political establishment for off-field matters before the end of the pod too. But I just don't understand the confidence in referees, especially when you see the tackle of Mikey Moore at Livingston and the audio and everything this week. Like, at some point, we're just going to have to admit that the standard refereeing in Scotland is simply not. And listen, it's not immune to just Scotland, but it is beyond not good enough. It's amateur. And I've said this before, and I go back, until there's a root and branch reform of officiating, we're going to continue to have conversations like this. And yeah, by this stage, I don't even understand this rule. I don't know how on earth we can have that amount of games ruled out. I mean, quite frankly, that's more than one every 2 games. It's madness.
It really is. And we get told that VAR, it's not going to re-referee games and it'll just be used as and I think we're all seeing it, and people will know if they listen to the show regularly that I hate VAR. I think it has removed a lot of the joy. Actually, funnily enough, Dave, I saw Danny Welbeck talking about it at the weekend. He said that it's not the same scoring a goal, scoring what was a winner against Liverpool, and he said VAR has taken a lot of the joy out of it. You know, that's a player telling us. So it's not just us as fans. But if it is going to stay, and it is, then absolutely we have to have far better usage of it. But I go back to the fact you can't make that mistake, right? And continue to be a grade 1 referee. If 3 of them saw that, this is the issue that Colm has, is that standards are getting worse under his watch, not better. Everyone agrees on that. Standards are getting worse. And the Rangers have proposed a meeting to discuss this among all the other clubs, and hopefully all the other clubs will do it. Now, we all know there's a big part of them that might go, oh, it's Rangers, so we're not doing it. But it is genuinely affecting, I was going to say everybody, it's affecting 11 teams. But it's so bad. And I think you see the continual mistakes, the difficulty that fans are having accepting is because the mistakes happen and then they're not ever rectified by action being taken against the official or by people saying, right, okay, here's a learning, right? Here's a learning. We should know this. Now, I don't want to rehash previous week's show where I've said about full-time refs. I've mentioned this before. I don't understand the argument against it other than one that comes from a referee point of view, which is people say to me, the refs won't agree to that because they'd have to give up their day jobs. Fine, fuck them. Let's have a 5-year grace period where we bring through new professional referees. Are you honestly telling me you wouldn't get people signing up to be a professional referee, if we could pay them, 60, 70 grand a year, which is what a lot of these referees make from their appearances through the season? Of course you could. You could train a whole generation of them. But I just can't see how it would get any worse. That one at the weekend, here's the other thing about it, David. See, just from a purely human point of view, you would think that they would have enough common sense to go, do you know what? We've been right under the microscope here. Even if we fit, that one, we're not going to disallow this. It's 4-1. It doesn't make a blind bit of difference. Common sense would tell you not to interfere in it. We don't need to get involved in this, so we're not going to. But it never stops them.
No, I think this is part of the reason where, look, referees I don't think are particularly popular species anywhere in the world, but I think how we are treated, and I'm not saying even necessarily we as Rangers, but I probably am meaning it as the vast majority of the we, but I mean how football clubs in general are treated by referees, just in terms of the arrogance, in terms of the fact of like the failure, in my view, to accept criticism, to sort of shy away from scrutiny. Like, I'd love to know what Willie Cullen does, bar go on a podcast once a month. I also think your argument, I've made the same points about the full-time professionals. I just don't understand. I think here's our problem. VAR, and I was a very strong proponent of VAR. Like, I remember when we were, I remember when I was inside the club as well, we were pushing hard for it. And one of the reasons we were pushing so hard for it was, if you recall, Christopher Julian's goal against us in the League Cup final, where we battered them and they ended up beating us 1-0 from an offside goal. That was sort of the kind of straw that broke the camel's back, because our view was, and I think my view still is, that the refereeing and the officiating was so poor that surely having a layer of accountability, or to essentially help referees on a human level, would solve a lot of their problems. But then what I think none of us banked on was actually having poor quality referees, and a whole amateur approach to the entire officiating. That's still going to be an issue in terms of the operation of VAR, and that is the problem, that we've actually made a situation worse. We've exacerbated it rather than than solved a lot of these problems, and that's where my real frustration lies now.
I don't believe that there's any drive to make the standards better. I think that when there's any criticism, what they do is they just circle the wagons, and it's almost like, well, these are the referees we've got, deal with it. And I no, I don't think we should be dealing with it. I think it's remarkable that they're part-time, given the money that's in the game these days. And as I say, that argument that gets put forward is, well, refs wouldn't want to do it. Well, tough. In that case, you say to them, look, lads, in 3 or 5 years, you're going to be full-time. if you don't want to do that, you don't want to give up your day job, fine. You'll be retiring then. And we're going to use this grace period to train up a whole new level of referees. But I'm like you. I'm baffled as to what Willie Collum does. I mean, I genuinely can't tell. Maybe there's a lot of stuff and we just don't see it, but I don't really know. How much can you do, by the way, David, with them when they're all working all day?
But this is the point that I have made, and I've said the exact same thing about the Irish League referees as well. Like, um, was it Mike Riley was brought in essentially to do the sort of similar to job to Column on a sort of consultancy basis, but in reality, how are you ever going to improve refereeing if what you meet everybody in a Tuesday night down, the local church hall to talk about the fuck ups you made on a Saturday? Like, in reality, we can't expect, and I've always said this, and this is a defense of referees. If you were to add up, and this is a ballpark figure, right? So let's say the average wage starting in that both teams is going to be, let's say there's 500,000 of wages on that, the 22 players in the team. There's probably more. Let's even say it's 500,000, right? Now, I don't know what a referee gets paid, but it feels to me a grossly disproportionate and actually unfair position to put someone in to say, right, you and your four mates are going to turn up on a Saturday here with, a whistle and a couple of flags, and you're going to manage a, 22 blokes who are getting paid, thousands of times more than they're getting paid, tens of thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times more, on a situation that, make no mistake about it, every game now is a cup final across certainly us, them, and Hearts' games. And I don't know what they get paid, but certainly they're not getting paid
It's about a
in
grand a
fair.
game.
Yeah, right. So they're getting paid a grand game, which is actually, you're right. So actually, part of the problem is they're probably too well paid in a way
For part timers, yeah.
for part timers, but the issue will then be they're not well enough paid to give up their day jobs. So
They might not be, right? The current lot might go, it's not worth it to me give up my day job for refereeing. I understand it's a short career, but you train up ones then who are.
correct.
I genuinely, this is the argument. It gets put forward and they say, well, we couldn't have. Are you honestly telling me you couldn't hire if you were saying, right, referees 60 grand a year? You wouldn't get applicants?
Of course
Of
you
course
would.
you would.
And this is the challenge now. That if we're going to continue down this line, you're going to have less and less because actually, and the irony that the team who have been most vociferous about referees, who have caused the most, make no mistake, there was targeted campaigns of the likes of beating after an old firm and people having to allegedly move house and their work addresses being shared online, etc. The irony that the fan base that organised that probably benefit the most from it for obvious reasons, but also the fact is that you know we are actually creating a situation where it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have a situation where you don't have referees well enough equipped to do their jobs and they're not to their sufficient standard. So therefore, people like us and podcasts and fans and people on social media are critical of them. And it gets to the point where, you know, life becomes so unbearable that actually it's not worth their while, it's not worth their hassle. And I think like that's the same that goes for, I mean, it's the same like as an MSP or an MP, and people talk about, they're too well paid, one thing or another. Yeah, but you got to bear in mind it's a short career, might only last 5 years, and ultimately, you're under heavy public scrutiny, and affects your life and your family's life. So, therefore, they're paid a certain amount. So the same as, in my view, should go for referees. And I just don't understand the amount of money in the SFA, amount of money in Scottish football, that, as you say, you couldn't gather that amount up to have a proper professional full time refereeing setup.
No, I mean, and I think the time is coming that we do need radical solutions, because this, dicking about on the margins, which is kind of all Willie Collum seems interested in doing, is not working. The standard is getting worse. They're making more and more errors. VAR seems to have made them worse, not better. It's quite clear that the guys doing VAR don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know when to intervene, when not to. The whole thing is an absolute mess, and look, this might not be the right solution, but it is a solution. And I'm a great one for if something isn't working, you try solutions. They may not work, and then you go, it didn't work, we'll try something else, but you try. There doesn't seem to be any appetite for that to happen at the moment. And it is interesting, that because there's another team involved in the title race, that I think that people are beginning to see what we've been saying for years. It's not the old firm who benefit from this. It's one side of it, and it ain't us. But time though for Tav though. He was like, right, well, try ruling this one out. Brilliant free kick, absolute stunner to give us the 4-1 victory. Everyone leaving Ibrox on a high, and it did put us in a good mood. And the next day, of course, Celtic losing was important, and I think it was psychologically important, Dave, because I do know some Rangers fans that had basically given them full points, from here on in. It was almost like, right, okay, well, they're going to win all their games now. And I think there was a realisation that none of the three teams at the top are perfect. This is not going to be a record points tally year. It's not even going to be one that would normally win it. I don't really care about that so long as we end up the top of that. And I think that, as you mentioned right at the start, I really don't see all three teams winning. Well, they can, obviously, because they play each other. But if any team wins 7 games, obviously they do win the league. But I don't look at any of the three sides and say, you're capable of that. I do look at us, though, and say, I think we're capable of picking up the most points.
Yeah, well, what I'd say is, and again, bit of a mea culpa, and I think I said this quite regularly now, I was waiting for Hearts to drop off, and every time I kind of thought it was coming, they seem to be still hanging in there. Whether or not they are able to do that across 7 matches is probably not dissimilar to ourselves, where actually I am pleasantly surprised we are still hanging in there. If I'm honest, I didn't think, quite frankly, we would be capable of a sustained run. Whether we still are capable of a sustained run remains to be seen. What I would say is, even if we aren't capable of a sustained run, I do think the weakness of the other two teams may, to an extent, help us, and we may end up almost kind of uh, winning the league by being the least worst, if that makes sense. I have to say, I was begrudgingly, and maybe it's just a little bit of kind of, A, self-protection, and B, sort of scar tissue, because we've been here so many times before, but I just assumed they would start to pull away. And I actually, in hindsight, don't really know why. I think maybe just
History.
Yeah.
It's not what we're watching, it's what we've watched.
Yeah, but clearly they are not. And I mean, I think and listen, losing an Old Firm in any circumstances, or drawing an Old Firm that felt like a loss in any circumstances, is never good. But in reality, that's probably why the last 2 Old Firms were so frustrating, because actually they are so poor. And I think, again, whoever goes on to win the league now, I think it'll come down to A, being that little bit better than others around them. But I also think I can see a lot of the head-to-heads maybe ending up in draws. So it's almost about, in a strange way, it's probably going to be everyone's game against the likes of Motherwell and Falkirk that actually will be so crucial. And that's why them dropping points yesterday was so enjoyable. I did also enjoy a few Kerrydale meltdowns regarding the manager of Dundee United, which was hilarious. One including revoking him and his son's season ticket at Parkhead.
Yeah, it's always struck me as a very strange thing in Scottish football. And I think it's particularly from Celtic supporters that these guys are professionals. Do you genuinely expect them to not win? But I saw a Hearts fan lambasting the official Kelly account for not letting Hearts win last week because they saying, "Oh, look, you're helping the Old Firm here." Kelly in a relegation battle, mate. But then I'm illogical when it comes to football, so I don't know why I expect everybody else to be logical. And as we said, as we've both admitted on this, you go up and down, and that is what happens in the title race. There are weeks you feel like, oh man, we're nailed on for this, and there's weeks you feel like we've no chance in this. The manager, though, he does exude a calm, and I think that is really helpful at this stage of the season, David.
Oh yeah, look, I think that I think it is going to be. Look, as I said, the very first thing I said on the pod this afternoon was that there will be there are potential to be weekends that are the opposite of last weekend for us. And I think it's about that ability to remain calm when everyone else is the Rudyard Kipling poem and everyone else around you is losing theirs. Keep your head and everyone else around you is losing theirs. That that's the challenge. It is very much one game at a time. In reality, I think we can hang in here much longer than they can now because we're only two off the top. They're sorry, we're three off the top
3
actually,
off
aren't
the
we?
top, they're
We're
5.
three off the top. They're five. Yeah, so I think certainly the pressure's very much in them uh, because they can't fall out of the title. And I think actually the split fixtures, look, they're always important. There's no doubt about that. But the split fixtures, excuse me, are going to be very important, especially given that we know that we're away to both Parkhead and Tynecastle.
Yeah, I mean, that is a factor, but one game.
Obviously, I think the way the club have handled the fallout from the old firm, which was 2 weeks today, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
I think that the club have handled it very well. I think, no doubt, holding their hands up to say, listen, we're more than happy to have an investigation. Let's have an investigation and see what went wrong where. We're not saying we're perfect, but we're certainly not going to accept the narrative that it was big bad Rangers as per usual. I thought it was actually interesting as well, and certainly this is for Northern Ireland based Bears. If anyone was on the buses, and I had a good chat with Greg Marshall about this on Saturday afternoon. But long story cut short, Police Scotland were pulling in buses on the way from the boat, searching bags, including kids' bags, etc. And I actually spoke to a police source who told me that actually you can confiscate open alcohol, but you can't search people's bags without having legitimate reason to do so. And I think it's interesting now, Davey, when you see even today the admission that the Broom Loan was overfilled due to people getting in without tickets, the police not being aware of that, and essentially the police not being prepared for what then happened. I think it's really interesting that the club have done really well to set the narrative, but ultimately, like all these things, it all comes out in the wash, and I think it is concerning if Police Scotland have a view of, well, let's start doubling down here in terms of their treatment of football fans, because ultimately, and this certainly isn't me defending any other club, but I do think the way football fans are treated in Scotland is disproportionate. It clearly comes from Mr. Swinney and those on high, and I think that all fans should be aware of their rights at all times when they're going to and from games.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, football fans, we are treated we are judged by, if you like, the worst of us as being the standard, and that doesn't happen anywhere else. It doesn't happen at concerts or music festivals or whatever. And the idea that everyone who's going as a potential hooligan is a nonsense. It really is. And I've always argued if you treated supporters in a less bovine fashion, maybe you'd get behaviour that reflected that from the people that you're saying cause the issues. But yeah, that was serious overkill, and so obviously a reaction
Yeah,
to their mistakes. But you're absolutely right. What the club have done is they've said, look, we are open to, did we make mistakes? And if we did, sure, we can air them, but we're not taking all the blame for this when there were clearly other factors. And you're right, with the Scottish Police Federation coming out and basically saying, the police operation didn't work and listing the reasons why. I think that's given some more ammunition to that view. Anyway, folks, that will do us for this week here on Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. Be back next week with our usual International Week Q&A, and then back the following week after we take on Dundee United at Ibrox. In the interim, though, you can keep up to date on all things Rangers by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/Heart and Hand. And, of course, we are due to check out our sponsors, Rangers Youth Development Co. at rydc.co.uk. My thanks to Mike Lee and Paul Myers, our producers, and my thanks to David Graham.
Thank you, Davey. Thank you, listeners, and enjoy the international break. And I'm off to Italy on Thursday for what in reality will be a miracle that is required, but hopefully Northern Ireland give us something to cheer about when we're out there.
More holidays than Judith Chalmers, you.
Yeah, the only thing is, if you count holidays as following Rangers in Northern Ireland, you're meant to enjoy the time you go
Ah,
away,
fair,
Davey.
yeah.
Whilst this is more, I think, it's a bit more of a kind of labour of love,
A
isn't it? And
duty.
it's a yes, it is. It's a duty, very much so.
Well, best of luck then. And as I say, folks, we'll be back soon. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.